Welcome to the Korea Society's Arts and Culture program. I'm Jo, Senior Director of Arts and Culture. South Korean film industry is producing movies and series eagerly anticipated by the global audience, and it is now considered one of the few countries outside the US to have captivated the world's hearts and minds through its entertainment products. And the exponential growth of the South Korean film industry is also mirrored by increasing interest from the press and academia all over the world. The South Korean film industry is also the title of the first detailed scholarly overview of the industry, discussing topics from short films to popular television series and exploring the major changes in South Korean filmmaking and marketing. Joining us for a conversation about the South Korean film industry, the industry, and the book are three contributors to this new volume. Professor Sangjoon Lee, who joins us from Hong Kong, is Associate Professor of Asian Cinema at the City University of Hong Kong's School of Creative Media. Professor Yong joins us from Vancouver, where he is Distinguished SFU Professor in the School of Communication at Simon Fraser University. Along with Junhyung Jo, they are the co-editors of the new volume. And Professor Jason Bechervaise, who joins us from Seoul, where he teaches at Hanyang University. Welcome to the Korea Society, everyone. It is great to have you all join us today.
Thank you for having us.
If you have any questions to our guest tonight, please send them via email, artsandculture@koreasociety.org. So I would like to start with, in the introduction of this volume, it is mentioned that the success of South Korean cinema was its way of defending its own industry. Can you briefly tell us about the state of the Korean film industry before, say, 1990s and how it has evolved during the last 3 decades?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Jay. By the way, thank you so much for inviting us to the book event for the South Korean film industry. This is the book just came out a month ago. So we are, and also thank you for joining us today. I cannot see the audience, but I believe there are audience watching our show. So thank you for joining us. So we are joining in 4 different cities, 4 different time zones. Here in Hong Kong, it's very early in the morning, so it's pretty it's still dark outside, but I'm very happy to join here. Okay, that's a big question. So I thought about it, how to answer your question, because I was in South Korea in the 1990s as a film student. I grew up, and then I had the dream of becoming a film director in the early 1990s. I was one of those wannabe filmmakers in 1990s. I got into college in 1993, so I want to begin with my stories to give you more inside perspectives in the 1990s, because our book, The South Korean Film Industry, begins in the early 1990s, because we focus on the 1990s and on early 2000 as a crucial time for the South Korean film industry. In 1993, when I first saw 임권택's 서편제 in a movie theater, it was a Dansong Theater in Jongno in South Korea. I was the first year film student in South Korea. It was a nationwide sensation, 서편제. So everyone loved the film. It got 1 million audiences in the movie theater. But the Korean film industry in that year, in 1993, was experiencing the lowest domestic film market share in history. It marked 15.9%. So when you say 15.9%, means let's say probably young people, young generation, teens and 20s and 30s, normally don't go to movie theaters for supporting local films. Local films are normally were consumed by seniors and then people who didn't want to read subtitles. So 15.9% was probably a low point in history of Korea. of course, 1980s to 1990s, the South Korean film market, like many other countries around the world, was dominated by Hollywood. This market domination peaked in the early 1990s as the U.S. first neoliberal trade policies and pushed Korea to open its film market to more American product. That was a crucial time in Korean film industry. Of course, there were some occasional hit films like 서편제, To the Stray Island, or Two Cops. Those were major breakthrough in South Korean box office in that year. But the South Korean film industry in that year, 1993, was almost a near collapse. And that year, I started my degree in film directing. So me and my cohort, most of us, even though we were studying cinema, we were dreaming of becoming film directors. But we knew that we didn't have bright future ahead because of even ourselves, we ourselves didn't go to watch local films. Instead, we consumed a lot of international films, European films and other Asian films. I mean, Wong Kar-wai was my hero, and many of us love Chinese fifth generation cinema and also Taiwanese cinema like Hou Xiaoxian and Edward Yang. But not many of us actually consumed and watched local films. So, but 8 years later, in 2001, when I graduated from college, everything changed. South Korea became the first film industry in recent history in 2001 to reclaim its domestic market back from Hollywood. And the early 2000s was also the landmark period for Korean cinema. The high quality Korean local product flowed outward to global film market to connect with the international audiences. And also a lot of Korean films won award from international film festivals during those period. So Chanuk Park became, and Bong Joon-ho and Lee Chang-dong became household names of international film festivals and art house circuit. So the question was, what happened to Korean cinema between 1993 and 2001? 1993, the industry was almost collapsed, and then domestic film market share was 15%, only just about 15%. And 2001, suddenly it became over 50% domestic market share, and in 2006, it reached 67% domestic market share. That was the third highest in the world. So what actually happened to Korean cinema was our question. And it was not just my question. It was a questions by many academic peoples and also industry professionals as well. The project started in, I think it's about 2018, when I first discussed about this issue with Professor Yong and Jo Jun-young, another co-editor of this book. We decided to write a book together to solve the puzzles of what happened to Korean cinema during that time, and then we wanted to do so. But COVID-19 happened, and so we decided, instead of writing a book together, we decided to edit the book with more authors to navigate and to explore the various aspects of Korean, South Korean film industries. So Jason Bechervaise was one of those one of those contributors. We asked to contribute a chapter, and then he did wonderfully. So we had many authors covering many different topics in Korean cinema studies. For example, like, the regional and intra-regional co-productions, Korea's emerging film cultures and film festival culture and government support, and also consequences of digitalizations and the Netflix issues. So all have been discussed in this book. So try to figure out the ways how to answer such questions. Professor Dal Yong-jin is going to talk a little bit about his chapters, and I will probably talk a little bit about my one, and Jason also does that. So I hope our conversation and also the book, The South Korean Film Industry, helps to understand more about South Korean film industry issues.
Yes, so let's start with Professor Jin. Your chapter focuses on production, distribution, and exhibition of South Korean cinema. So Tell us a little bit about your chapter and how the process of production and distribution of the Korean films are different from, let's say, that of Hollywood and or other film industries outside of the Hollywood system.
Hey, thanks so much, Jay and Sangjoon. Professor Sangjoon Lee already talked about brief history of production, not the film production, but our book production. We started to think about the importance of Korean film industry because there was no book on a film industry. There were several books, film books on aesthetics, genres, and the mise-en-scène, but not the industry. And therefore, we started to think about how to organize the film industry. Eventually, we made an edited volume. This chapter, production, distribution, and exhibition, is one of the first three chapters on the history, policy, and the structure of the industry, which means that in this particular chapter, I have talked about a few major issues. First of all, namely production, distribution, and exhibition through the use of rapid growth of infrastructure on the neoliberal globalization starting in the mid-1980s, which means that I have developed some analysis about the Korean film industry over the past 30 years. I mainly talked about the major element of the advent of the growth of Korean cinema, focusing on relevant cultural policies behind the scenes, which means the transformation of the film industry in the local context. I also talked about how Korean cinema had developed its industrial structures in the middle of the conflict and the tensions between neoliberal globalization and state-led developmentalism over the past several decades. Finally, in this chapter, I talk about several main issues influencing the Korean film industry, including screen monopoly, screen oligopoly, to determine their roles in Korean cinema eventually in the future. As Sang-jun Lee already talked about Korean film industry, and Jay also talked about Korean film industry has emerged as one of the major centers for non-Western cinema. Korean cinema has become one of the largest box office since the mid 2010s. The significant element of the advent of the Korean cinema diverses. However, we have to talk about a few major issues. Again, production, distribution, and the other exhibition. The Korean film industry has changed in production because Korean cinema experienced one of the worst recession in history in the early 1990s. The number of their domestic films decreased, and the market share of their local films plummeted since the Korean government opened the market, Korean film market, to their international films, in particular Hollywood majors. The market share of domestic films over time plunged from about 30% in 1980 to only 15.9% in 1993. However, Korean cinema has changed its direction and become one of the main cinemas in the 2010s and 2020s. As this slide shows, in 2019, before the pandemic, Korea made one of the largest box offices, only behind the United States, China, and Japan, which is the phenomenal growth. So we will talk about a few the historical trajectories of the growth of the film production first. The Korean film industry in the realm of production started to grow again in the mid-1990s. In 1999, Shuri, one of the first blockbusters in South Korea, attracted 6.2 million moviegoers. Shuri also made the top position of the Japan's box office in 2000. The success of Shuri encouraged the many filmmakers, to turn their eyes to their big budget films, including action thrillers, sci-fi adventures, and horror films. In early 2000, Joint Security Area also recorded a similar number of the admissions to jury. So Korean cinema has continued to develop blockbuster-level movies in terms of their admission, including 명랑, The Admiral, 극한 직업, Extreme Jobs, 신과 함께, Along with the God, and the Veteran. More importantly, the exhibition sector has shown very interesting trend. As this slide shows, between 2015, 2019, the admission per capita was beyond 4.1 and made it 4.37, even beyond Hollywood per capita, which means that starting in mid-2010s, Korean cinema has recorded one of the largest, one of the highest in terms of the admission per capita. Because of the pandemic, of course, the number of the admission per capita dropped to 1.15 in 2020, slightly recovered to 2.47, but in 2023, however, it's still struggling, which means that the overall growth of the Korean film industry has been relied on the admissions, people's moviegoers in South Korean film context. Having said that, Korean film industry has rapidly increased its the capacity in terms of their production, in terms of their market share, in terms of the number of their screens. As this slide shows, in terms of their number of their film production, Korea produced only around the 65 films when it recorded only 15.9% of their market share in 1993. However, Korea made the more than 800 films per year in 2020, 2021. Consequently, the market share of their domestic films has increased from their only 15.9% to 68% in 2020, and consequently, consistently above the 50% level. In terms of the number of their screens, it was the only less than the 600 in 1995, but in 2023, it was the more than 3,300 screens. Since we have no time, I might want to talk about distribution briefly. The business of film distribution has been getting important. As you might understand, in the film industry, distribution is everything. Distribution determines marketing, promotion, release venues, and date. Therefore, we have to carefully understand the increasing role of the distribution. Korean cinema has developed its distribution sector, but interestingly enough, the Korean film distribution sector has been led by a few jabbers that control all levels of the process since the 1990s. Jabbers like the CJ, Lotte jumped into the film distribution and exhibition markets as well as the production. They established major distribution firms like CJ Entertainment, now CJ E&M, Lotte Entertainment, and the Showbox by Orion, for example. The distribution sector has been concentrated into a handful of the mega distributions. For example, in 2018, 5 major distributors, including Lotte, CJ E&M, New Showbox, and the Megabox, accounted for 88% of the market share. The situation has a bit changed because of the COVID-19 and the influx of the Netflix and the global OTT platforms in the local market. As this slide clearly shows, the market share by major distributors changed. In 2023, Plus M made the first spot, while Lotte and CJ E&M made their second and first, far lower than the Plus M. Plus M is their megabox in the owned distribution sector. The reason is that in 2021, 2022, 2023, there were only a handful of the big budget movies, including 범죄도시 2, 범죄도시 3, and 범죄도시 4. Plus M participated in the process, and therefore Plus M, previously unknown distributor, made one of the major the contributors and their first spot in the distribution sector. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So we heard about the distribution part, but in order to distribute the films, obviously they have to make ones too. So Professor Bechervaise, your chapter is titled The South Korean Film Industry's Ambivalent Relationship with the Studio System. So what can you tell us about the studio system in Korea and how does it different from, let's say, that of Hollywood?
Okay, thanks, Jay, and thank you for having me. Thanks to, of course, the Korean Society in New York, and of course the editors of this wonderful book, Sangjoon Lee, Dae-Yong Jin, and Chun-Young Cho. So thank you for collaborating with me, including me in your book, and thank you for your most wonderful comments as I put together my chapter. So looking at the studio system, I think for me it's always been one area of fascination, to see how the studio system has evolved in Korea. I think it's a complex relationship with the wider Korean film industry. On the one hand, it's one of necessity. So if you look at how the industry has grown without the chaebols, without these like family-owned conglomerates, the industry wouldn't be where it is today. So take, for example, the top 20 best performing Korean films in the box office. They've all been financed by the studios. You've got Roaring Currents, which is a CJ film. They've also distributed and financed, films like Veteran, for example. Of course, Bong Joon-ho's Parasite. And I think there was some criticism, controversy within those in the Korean film industry, because you've got a film like Parasite, which is looking at, the disparity between the rich and the poor. And then you've got this kind of hypocrisy, really, because you've got the studio very much kind of consuming the smaller players within the industry, consolidating its presence. And, it's not just CJ, of course. You've got Lotte, who financed, along with the Guards, the Pirates, very successful films, Showbox, who are behind, Taeguki, Taxi Driver, The Host, and a number of others. And I think it's reflective of a wider kind of, some would say, an issue of the Korean economy, that, it's very much dependent on these family-owned conglomerates. Which has been true since the 1960s. And so if you look at the growth of Korea's economy, in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, hugely reliant on these chaebols. Of course, Samsung, Hyundai, Samsung's semiconductor chips, they contribute a huge percentage, something like 12.5% to Korea's GDP. You take that out of the economy, there's a big problem. And so I think that the administrations here try to reduce the reliance on the chaebols, but it's never been successful. And so I think if you're looking at the Korean film industry, I think it's reflective of kind of a wider problem. But so just looking at how it's evolved, certainly and that's what I explore in my chapter. And so in the 1990s, you have chaebols like Samsung entering the film industry, capitalizing on the VHS rental market, Hyundai as well. Marriage Story in the early 1990s, or is one of the kind of pivotal films, investing in that, and the success of that led to, Chaebol's fully financing Korean films. You got Shiri, which was, actually Samsung's last film, but yeah, massively successful and ultimately hugely significant because it kind of ushered in the blockbuster era, which has been very successful for the Korean film industry. Less successful these days, kind of post-pandemic era, but certainly in the 2000s and 2010s, these blockbusters really kind of drove the industry domestically. And then because of the IMF crisis, basically the Chaebols had to focus on their core industries. And so what that did was it left kind of a vacuum. And so other Chaebols kind of entered in their place. So CJ, of course, Lotte, and Showbox. And so they initially were, they didn't really have the expertise in films. So they were reliant on a kind of new generation of producers and directors to kind of lead the way. And I think that's one of the reasons why, the Korean film industry or Korean films was so innovative in the 1990s. And as these films started, connecting with audiences, the studios were becoming more successful, and in the meantime, they were building these multiplexes. So CJ built it, or CGV built its first cinema in Gampyeong, which is actually quite close to where I am, in Hanyang University next to Wangshinli. And then Lotte built its first cinema in Ilsan, which is a satellite city north of Seoul. And yeah, Megabox as well. And so, these studios are essentially fully integrated. So kind of looking at the Hollywood system, it's kind of reminiscent of kind of the early Hollywood era, where you've got these studios financing, producing, distributing, and exhibiting films, and now actually having films on CJ's case, their streaming service, TVing. So very much, in control of all the stages of production. So if you compare this to, let's say, the film industry in the UK, for example, it's quite different, because in the UK they tried to build a studio system in the 1990s and 2000s, but ultimately it wasn't successful because they just didn't have the capital to do so. They built the UK Film Council, there was lottery funding, but ultimately the industry flourished because of its relationship with Hollywood, because Hollywood would have films shot in the UK. So if you think of films like Harry Potter or James Bond films, they're kind of international co-productions. The money comes from America, but they use British talent. They're shot in the UK. And so, the governments in the UK were actually very successful in putting together like tax breaks and incentives to try and lure in these American productions. And so, in 2019, it contributed, 12.5 billion pounds to the economy, one of the best performing sectors of the British economy. And Netflix, for example, between 2020, I think in 2024, invested £6 billion into their content in the UK. So massively successful. But the problem with the UK is that they don't have a studio system, whereas in Korea they do. And so they're able to produce films, with Korean financing, using, Korean talent. And then in the late 2000s and 2010s, these kind of younger studios emerge, led by NEW. And so NEW are behind films like Train to Busan, one of the most significant Korean films of the 2010s. So yeah, and then in 2013 they had a stellar year. They financed and distributed Cold Eyes, New World, Miracle in Cell Number 7, The Attorney, and they were actually the best performing studio that year. And that year, admissions to Korean films hit, I think, around about 127 million. Kind of a record for the Korean film industry. And that's interesting because in the 2000s, like post kind of after 2005, yes, of course, in 2006 you had Bong Joon-ho's record breaking The Host, but the production bubble in the Korean film industry essentially inflated and then burst. So there were too many films, not enough people watching them. And so the industry went into a decline. But then it recovered in the 2010s, owing, I think, to, the studios kind of investing, owing to the fact that the studios investing in Korean films. And NEWs were approaching things somewhat differently. They were financing, kind of a whole range of different films and so in 2013 they had this great year, as I mentioned, and they've been a major player during the 2010s. And then there were other studios that emerged. There was Megabox. And Megabox is owned by the Jungang Group, and I would say if you're looking at like kind of the big local chaebols at the moment, I would say CJ, which are clearly still very powerful. And then there's the Jungang Group, because they own Megabox, and Megabox plus M have proved quite successful recently with the Roundup films, and also other titles as well. And so Megabox plus M, owned by the Jungang Group, they own JTBC. So it's not just films, but television as well. And so there's Ace Makers, there's Merry Christmas. So there's and Merry Christmas is interesting because it's financed by Chinese capital. And so these studios emerged, and some of them, it's been quite a challenging period because they emerged in the late 2010s. And of course, in the pandemic hit in 2020. So it's very difficult for like Ace Makers, for example, to get their films released. And so there was a bit of a backlog. And now we're in this kind of streaming era. So the industry is kind of in flux. So Netflix are financing so much content. And so I think in a way, looking at what's happened in the UK, I mean, Korea still has very much an established studio, system that's proved very successful, albeit controversial. I mean, yeah, of course, the screen monopoly, basically referring to how studios would release their films on a huge number of screens. Battleship Island is an example of that, and ultimately it didn't prove as successful as they expected, partly because of the historical issues that were discussed as a result of after it being released, but also because of the screen monopoly. The film had just been screened on so many sites, and so that has been an issue. But it's interesting now that I think before the pandemic, if you talk to those in the industry, those who were expressing concern about how the industry was evolving, it would be like CJ, the studio system, and now it's Netflix. And the thing is with Netflix, they pump a lot of money into the industry, but I think some would say, well, the Korean production companies are essentially subcontractors. So if you look at Squid Game, which obviously is a Netflix title, but the company involved in that is called Siren Pictures, and it's literally a very small company in Ilsan, I mentioned earlier, with 2 or 3 employees, including the CEO who produced the drama with Ha Dong-yeok. So I think as a result of that, I think there were those who were very kind of concerned with the power that Netflix has right now, and it's kind of reminiscent of how the UK industry, or the studios, the lack of how that's evolved in the UK, where the money comes in from the United States or from these powerful streaming companies. They're using Korean production companies, they're using talent, but ultimately the IP and the financing comes from the US. So I think at the moment it's a very complicated picture, but nevertheless a very interesting one. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, definitely. And you just mentioned a little bit about the Chinese also investing in Korean film industries, which leads us to Professor Lee's chapter, which is titled The Predicament of the South Korean Film Industry and the Chinese Film Market. So Professor Lee, tell us a little bit about, you need to turn your mic on too, but you're still muted, but tell us a little bit about your chapter.
Okay, thank you so much. By the way, thank you for excellent presentations by Yong and Jason. So I always love you guys talk. Okay, so my one is about Chinese film market and also the recent turn to Southeast Asia market and also the US film market. So I will talking more about the South Korean film market outside the South Korea. As aside from China issue, since the early 2000s, the Korean film industry began actively seeking alternative market to increase the size of productions and maximize profit. I always tell to my students, because of the size of market for South Korea and also the population of South Korea is okay, but not enough for ambitious South Korean producers and directors for making large budget blockbuster films or making or transnational productions. So South Korean film industry since early 2000 began thinking about foreign partners and also increasing the market outside Korean Peninsula. As Yong in his presentation today also mentioned about Shiri and its unexpected commercial success in Japan in 1999, it became the third most successful foreign film distributed in Japan in that year. It was a surprising hit. Since then, Japan has been the South Korean film industry's most important overseas market and collaborators. But the opening of Chinese film market in the early 2000s was more like the blessing to the film industry, Korean film industry, until 2016. So historically, thinking about Chinese film market, because the concept of Chinese film market was never existed before 2000, because China as a country was never considered as market for Korean cinema. When you think about Chinese film market, it is a concept of Chinese market has been contentious issue in Korean film industry during the Cold War era, which is my specialty. China was widely regarded as a menacing communist territory. Instead of referring to it as 중국, China, the Korean government called mainland China as 중공, communist China, right? So Taiwan, therefore, was the only legitimate 중국 or 자유중국, free China, on Korean's Cold War map of Asia until August 1992. When Korea and China established full diplomatic relations, which means the end of diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So for many decades, at least to Korean film industry, 중국 영화, Chinese cinema, meant popular genre films produced in Hong Kong, such as martial art films, kung fu films, gangster films, or tear-jerking melodramas, and so on. So unsurprisingly, Korea's cultural elite and cinephiles consistently look down on 중국 영화, the Chinese cinema. But really, China as a country, as I mentioned, was not a true market. But when it started, the first Korean film made with China, I mean mainland China, was Anarchist, came out in 1999. It was not a planned co-production with China. It was produced by Lee Jun-ik, who is now a very famous and established filmmaker himself. Lee Jun-ik approached a Shanghai film studio, hoping to reduce the cost of this big-budget epic drama about Korean resistance fighters in Shanghai during the Japanese colonial period. The Shanghai studio liked the idea, like the proposal of Lee Jun-ik, and then the film was completed in 1999. Most of the film was shot in Shanghai. Anarchist was not a blockbuster, not a big box office success, so not many people remember the film. But it was the film that opened the door to Chinese film market. Between 2000 and mid-2010s, number of Korea-China big-budget epic co-production films were released in both markets, including The Promise, 무극, Seven Sword, 칠검, Daisy, Red Cliff, 적벽대전, and the Three Kingdoms, and so on. So CJ, Showbox, Boram Entertainment, and other major media conglomerates in Korea invested partially or fully in these joint ventures between Korea and China. And Hong Kong had always been worked as mediators between Korea and China. This blossoming Korea-China co-production practice can be roughly, in my chapter, I divided into three different stages. First stage, during the late 1990s to early 2000, China was more like an outsourcing partner for Korean film companies' runway production. So that also exploited their Chinese counterpart to manufacture high production quality Korean films with cheap labor and exotic landscapes. That was the first stage. And the second stage was the era of inter-Asian co-productions, which involved cinematic collaboration between the three states between multiple states in Asia, including Korea, Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, and Japan, and so on. This phase coincides with the Korean cinema's embrace in its second golden age in the early 2000s, so-called the Renaissance of Korean cinema in the 21st century. So Muguk, Chilgum, Daisy, and Red Cliff, those kind of films belong to this category. The third stage was the era of Korea's China production, which means Korean film production companies, aided by China's local partners, developed and produced films exclusively for China's market, not for the other market, not for Korea, but for China's market. The first commercial success to adopt this new strategy was A Wedding Invitation, directed by Woo Seok-keun. It was one of CJ's early attempts to tap into Chinese film market. It made a big hit in China, and CJ and other companies followed. They made films exclusively for Chinese market with Korean stars. The peak of this Korea-China network was the China-Korea co-production agreement that was signed in 2014 as part of China-Korea free FTA, free trade agreement. This arrangement accelerated Korea's entry into Chinese film market. I remember in October 2015, when I attended the Busan International Film Festival, everyone in that year was talking about China. And at the forum I participated in on Korean film director and producers, they said the future of South Korean cinema is China. But exactly 1 year later, everything changed. Because the China boom in the Korean film industry suddenly ended with the THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile Systems, deployment to Korea. In response, the Chinese government declared a ban, an unofficial ban on Korean media items, including K-pop, K-dramas, and cinema. So Korean film industry suddenly lost its promising market. So Korean film industry suddenly had to find something new, a different market. So they began thinking about the US more seriously. They began thinking about Southeast Asia. That was also related to the previous Moon Jae-in government, the policy toward Southeast Asia. So instead of chasing China, Korean film producers began thinking about Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia and Vietnam. So CJ and other companies began building the multiplex theaters and also co-producing films with regional talent, and also exclusive produced or remake South Korean films for Southeast Asian audiences. And also at the same time, the Train to Busan, Jason also mentioned about the film, the Train to Busan made a mega hit in Southeast Asia. That also helped for South Korean cinema to make into Southeast Asian market. And also a series of successful South Korean films at the international film festivals or art house market, such as the Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden, Hong Sang-soo's On the Beach at Night Alone, or Lee Chang-dong's Burning, and also Na Hong-jin's The Wailing. Those kind of films, with those films, Korean cinema expanded its market and entered to a new stage. And the pinnacle of that trend was 2020 of Parasite. It's major mega hit, not just Korea and Asia and Europe, but also in the United States, in American market. It made a pinnacle success. That was the peak of this movement. But also, there's many up and downs, and then at the peak of the moment, COVID-19 happened. And then another stage started. We're probably going to talk about this later, a bit later, right? So I'll probably wrap up my talk about the brief trajectories of Korea's intimate relationship with China, and also its unexpected breakup and to the Southeast Asia market. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope our viewers get just the idea of how complicated the whole idea of, what we are so used to just talking about how popular Korean culture is and how it's, going out to the world. And I hope they get the sense of how complicated it is actually. Speaking of complication, I wanted to go back to this idea that both Professor Jin and Professor Bechervaise mentioned. That is that a lot of people are very much aware that Korean economic system is often seen as being controlled by a handful of conglomerates known as chaebol in Korea. Any fans of Korean drama would know that that is also a very popular theme of many Korean dramas too. And the entertainment industry is no exception, as you just talked about. But obviously, there is an advantage of having big money behind the industry, as Professor Bechervaise mentioned about comparing the Korean studio system to the British one. But how does it affect sort of the cultural identity of the film industry? Um, how much of a control do the chaebols really have in terms of what's being produced?
Yeah, maybe I go first, followed by the Jason. So in terms of the Jaebol's involvement in the Korean film industry, I think that we have to think about two kind of their different stages. The first one is their production stage, and the exhibition stage followed. As we talked about Korean jaebers, including Samsung, Hyundai, Lotte, they participated in their production first in the mid 1990s and until very early 21st century. Actually, their Daewoo now disappeared, but Daewoo also was one of the major jaebers participated in the film production. They started with the media component, not their film, including their newspaper, television, broadcasting, and the cable. In Korea, the government started to allow the chaebol to own the cable channels in 1995. Several chaebols, including Hyundai, Daewoo, Samsung, they started to get the cable channel, and therefore they got some basic experience in the audiovisual sector. Therefore, they expanded their scope to include the film production. For example, Samsung developed Samsung 영상 사업단, and therefore, the Samsung invested in several movies, including Shuri. But suddenly, because of the IMF crisis, worst the economic crisis in South Korean history, made in 1997, Jaebol retreated from the production. Later, several secondary jaebels like the CJ, Lotte, they invested in the exhibition sectors. Therefore, the distribution sectors. Therefore, the Lotte, CJ, E&M have developed their identities as the distribution-driven film industries. the involvement of the Jaebol, as you talked about, have changed the identity in the film production and the film exhibition, of course. Now when Jaebol disappeared in the production sector, the majority of the funders are venture capitals, not the Jaebol driven. Therefore, the money into the film production is relatively small, and therefore they cannot make the blockbuster style movies. But during the process, they have changed their major scope, their major focuses from the blockbuster and the action movies to again the melodrama driven kind of the Korean themes. Korea has had the long history, unique history, because of the North-South Korean division, IMF crisis, military dictatorship, and some struggles between student and the government. the film makers have utilized and relied on Korean history, people's struggle in our kind of their contemporary society, and therefore they could make some films that the global people also resonate with, which means that the involvement of the Jebol and the retreat of the Jebol in their production has clearly influenced not only their structure but also the content.
Yeah, I mean that was some great points that Professor Jim made there. Yeah, I mean clearly the Chapels have been very dominant over the last few decades, and you know the major auteurs will collaborate with them. I mean Park Chung-uk's a good example. I mean he invariably works with CJ and Bong Joon-ho's Next Animation. You know they're fully financing that film, and yeah, I mean, they in terms of the films they produced, I mean, I think what the Chebel's been very good at is understanding how the industry operates, what people want to see, and also they're incredibly quick at you know evolving you know with audiences and their tastes and preferences and also understanding where the industry is going. So if you look at CJ for example, they've invested a huge amount. We talked a lot about distribution and financing, but actually they've also invested a lot of money in exhibition. They've obviously got this cinema chain. They pioneered this technology, ScreenX, and 4DX. And so it's not even just Korean films where they're making quite a lot of money from. It's also like American films. So Avatar 2, for example, James Cameron's film, that made a huge amount of money through these kind of premium formats in North America. And so they're selling, you know, this technology to overseas. And so they're kind of they're looking at various different, you know, they're working on various different kind of fronts. You know, they've got the exhibition sector. They also understand the streaming environment and how that operates. And CJ have obviously got TVing, and they're trying to compete with Netflix. And so they've also been kind of gobbling up or acquiring all these production companies. And so Studio Dragon is a great example of that. So if you watch a Korean drama, you'll often, I tell my students this, look at the production companies involved. And you know they're one of the most kind of prolific production companies in the world right now because they're just producing all this content, and CJ is attached to it. That's how these chaebols operate. You know, it's like it's not just you know cars, or it's not just you know banks or apartments. It's everything. They're ubiquitous, and I suppose that's you see that reflected in the Korean film industry. And actually, just to talk a little bit where the industry is right now, because last year in terms of like the admissions, you know, there was 40% down compared to like pre-pandemic levels, and writers now talk about how the blockbuster era is ended. And if you look at the films that have performed, you know, quite well over the summer, we've got Handsome Guys, Pilot, and Escape. You know, these are these aren't big blockbusters in the traditional sense, and in fact, some of the more expensive films haven't performed as well. But as a result of you know the kind of the more modest budget films actually connecting with audiences, the actual average number of moviegoers for July was around I think 5.62 million. And if you compare that to the average of, you know, between 2017 and 2019, which is 5.2 million. So it's actually up on, you know, pre-pandemic levels. And these aren't blockbusters driving the industry. These are kind of smaller films. And so that's what audiences are going to see now. And so it'd be interesting to see how the chaebols kind of adapt to that. But what I am hearing anecdotally is that they're just not investing in as many films as they used to. In fact, during the pandemic, even some studios were just not producing anything. I think that's changed now. I think they are producing stuff, but it's just not, you know, not these big tentpoles features that they once did, seeking these kind of high rate of returns. Hope that makes sense.
But speaking of this system? Actually, this is a question from one of the viewers. If there is anything being done to create a more fair system for the actors and crews, since the unions in Korea are not, you don't hear about, let's say, Screen Actors Guild or Screenwriters Guild in Korea. If there has been any change on that front, now that there has been, as all of you mentioned, there's so much money pouring into that industry.
I can answer that if you like. Okay.
Sure.
They do have guilds here. They got the directors guilds of Korea, and the producers guild, and so they do have them, but they're just nowhere near as powerful or as the guilds in America. I mean, just look at the strikes in the States. Last year basically brought the industry to a standstill. That just doesn't happen here. There have been laws implemented in terms of restricting the number of hours that workers can be on set. So I can't remember how many. I think it was like 56 hours a week or something. And so what happened as a result of that was actually the production budgets went up because they were having to work over. Shooting was taking place over a longer period. So there has been some efforts to try and make it a fairer working environment for all those involved. But yeah, it's still not, the unions are still not as kind of robust as they are in the States. And so that's, a work in progress, I think. I mean, it's interesting when, this is actually 10 years ago now, maybe 10 years ago, but so when the Korean directors were working, on global projects, so in 2013, Bong Joon-ho worked on, he released Snowpiercer, and Kim Jong-un's Last Stand, and Park Chan-wook's was it Stoker, and they often talked about having to follow the kind of the rules and regulations that were in place, which were actually quite different compared to Korea. So I think since then there's been some progress made, but there's still a long way to go. And if you do watch Korean films at the credits, you'll sometimes see the unions, accredited, or in brackets. So there are unions here, but they're just not quite as strong as they are in many other countries.
And we have to, I mean, we're running out of time, but we have to talk about the issue of streaming, as many of you mentioned, the issue of streaming is not something that only South Korean film industry faces. It's that the film industry in general is dealing with this new way of distribution. But one could also argue that without streaming, the popularity of Korean cultural exports would not be at the level that it is today. So it did also worked in favor for the industry. So what is the Korean film industry's response to streaming? Because we've been talking about film industry and almost television, what used to be television industry, almost interchangeably, but there is a difference, films that are made for in the classical sense of cinema versus what is being consumed on streaming. So what's the Korean films industry's response to this new era?
Maybe Chris, go first and then I'll follow.
So in terms of their streaming, as you might understand, Netflix entered the Korean market in the middle of the 2010s, and ever since Netflix and several global streaming services, including Netflix and Disney Plus, have influenced in two different ways: one production, one circulation. But in terms of their production, as Jason talked about, because of their labor, the hours restriction, the number of the money went up, meaning the production cost went up. But actually, the Korean film industry experienced the increasing production cost partially because of their Netflix. Netflix has made some original films, original dramas with the blockbuster level the investment in the scales. They put a lot of money into the production, and the Korean film industry could not compete with the global streaming services, and therefore they had to increase their budget, production budget. That's the first thing. This is the kind of the opportunities and the risk. But on the other hand, there is the one the good kind of the aspect of the Netflix and the Disney Plus because of their transmedia storytelling, which means that because of the Netflix, Korean the popular cultural product are becoming sources for the big screen culture like the film and the dramas, particularly webtoons. Korean webtoons are sources, working as their sources for their dramas and the films these days, not only in the South Korea local market, but in the global market because of their Netflix and Disney Plus. They are adapting webtoons as their sources to make the films and dramas, and therefore the streaming services, global streaming services provide both opportunities and the risk at the same time.
Yeah, so do you have time? 5 minutes? Yeah. Speaking of Netflix issues, Professor Dal Jin and I is a self-promotion, but we are editing a book together, tentatively titled as Netflix and the South Korean media industry in a globalizing world. And also together with Professor Hong Seok-kyung at Seoul National University. We are co-organizing a conference in Hong Kong on December 13th. It will also be broadcasted online. So I'll let you know. I mean, maybe Korea Society subscribers and members of Korea Society also can join the conference as an audience. So we talked about a lot of issues related to Netflix because it's this kind of issue that's going on at this moment. In my previous talk, today, I said the COVID-19 changed everything on South Korea's global direction, so global participations. So COVID-19 transformed everything, as we all know, because since March 2020, so-called I can say it's a vicious cycle has persisted because the studios and distributors have not released new films because there are no audiences. And the people have lost interest in theater because there were no exciting new films. So it's a kind of vicious cycles. So filmmakers, because their production suddenly stopped due to the COVID-19, they had to think about the way to think about the way to survive in such hostile environment. And then they began changing and transforming their already prepared film project into streaming proposed series or Netflix originals, Disney Plus originals, or Netflix films and series. Because Netflix, compared to the traditional TV network, it's more flexible. The traditional TV network, you have to make a 12 episode or 16 episode series with 1 hour, 20 minutes each, right? But Netflix is a little more flexible. You can do a 4 episode series or a 6 episode. I mean, 4 episodes, they say limited series. A 6 or 8 episode at regular series, and then you can also do the second or third seasons. It's more flexible. So for a filmmaker's perspective, if you have a 2 hour, 20-minute film project, if you extend the running time to 3 hours and then break it into 5 or 6 episodes, it makes sense, right? So filmmakers jump into the race of making Netflix original productions, and also technical crew because there were no jobs for them. But Netflix, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, all those streaming platforms, and also including South Korea's local OTT platforms like TVing and Wave, those were considered as more like opportunities for chance to keep producing the content. That's the kind of positive side. But there was also the negative side, as Jason also mentioned, and Dalyong also mentioned, because the general slump, and then the plunge of local film industry also influenced to the Netflix. This kind of interactions. Because Netflix and other streaming platforms also is reducing the budget for the South Korean productions, and also TV stations are also reducing the number of TV shows. Netflix is reducing the number of new Netflix TV shows, and then physical film production for theatrical release is also is struggling. And this year, less than 10 films are being made by major studios. Compared to 2019, before pre-COVID era, there was over 120 films were produced in South Korea and released. And then this year, it's very gloomy predictions for the film industry. It's too early to say that the South Korean film industry is actually is in crisis, but it's right now this really important period and during transitional period. So we really don't know actually where South Korean film industry is going from this moment, but because no one could expect what would happen to South Korean cinema after COVID-19. When Parasite won major award at Oscar, everything looked so rosy, and then everything looked so promising. And then COVID-19 suddenly happened. But COVID-19, compared to other countries, for South Korean media industry, it was opportunity at the same time, right? So through the COVID-19, through the OTT platform, South Korean cinema and TV dramas became a worldwide attention, got worldwide attention in such a short amount of time. Now it's also a major turning point for South Korean film and media industries. So we are witnessing the transition and big changes in South Korean film and media industry right now at this moment.
And I wish we had more time so I can ask you all my questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. But maybe one day in next few years or so, we can get together again and talk about what had happened.
With our Netflix book, I guess.
Exactly. But thank you so much once again for joining us. This was truly a pleasure, and congratulations on this wonderful new volume. South Korean film industries available wherever books are sold. So if you are inspired by this talk, please go and check it out. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.